The galaxy was at peace, or at least that was what the great empires liked to believe. Trade routes were open, fleets patrolled the stars, and ambassadors spoke in calm words while their people quietly feared the shadows growing at the edges of known space. For years, there were rumors about the Deathworlders, the humans from a distant spiral arm, a people whispered to be born on a planet so cruel that every living creature was a predator. Most dismissed these stories as myths told to frighten children. But the day would come when the galaxy learned that the rumors were true, and that peace was nothing more than a fragile illusion. It began on a small colony at the edge of the Valari Empire. The world was green and rich, filled with farming villages and families who had never seen war. When the invaders came, there was no warning. The sky tore open with fire, and ships that were black as ash descended. They were not raiders or mercenaries. They were something worse, an enemy bent not on conquest but on annihilation. The defenders of the empire sent their patrols, but the fleets were scattered and unprepared. One by one, their signals fell silent. The colony's surface burned, villages crushed into dust, and those who survived ran to the forests, clutching their children and hoping someone, anyone, would hear their cries. In the chaos, an old transmitter was found in the ruins of the colony's comm station. The engineers who worked there had been killed, but one survivor knew how to send a single pulse into the void. It was an SOS, simple and desperate, coded in an old frequency almost no one used anymore. It was not addressed to the Empire, nor to any ally. It was a frequency so ancient that most modern scanners ignored it. But those who remembered its origin knew what it meant. It was the call reserved for one people alone. The survivor pressed the button, his hands shaking, his body bleeding from burns. "Please," he whispered to no one but the dark. "If you are out there, if the Deathworlders are real, we need you." The signal shot into the stars, a cry flung into infinity, unlikely to ever be answered. And yet, something in the universe stirred. Far across the galactic rim, in the black waters of space where few dared to travel, the call reached a listening post. It was small, hidden, and silent, guarded by machines that never slept. For decades, it had waited, listening, watching, and now, at last, it woke. Deep below the post, in a chamber sealed by codes no empire dared touch, a message was carried to the fleet that slept in silence. The humans had not been seen in centuries. The last war they fought was remembered only in half-broken records and scarred worlds left behind. They had left the galaxy in peace, saying nothing, taking nothing, vanishing into the deep like ghosts. No one knew why they had left, but the stories remained. Stories of warriors who fought until their bones cracked, who burned their ships before letting them fall to enemies, who never abandoned those who asked for help. And now the Deathworlders had been called again. The Armada did not move all at once. It began with a single ship, black and silent, rising from the shadow of a dead star. Its engines lit with a roar like thunder, and the void itself seemed to tremble. One by one, more ships awakened, stretching like giants shaking off centuries of slumber. Their hulls bore scars of old wars. Their cannons slept heavy, but their power had not faded. Across the fleet, lights came alive, voices stirred, and orders were given in a language that made even hardened soldiers of other species shiver. When the signal reached their command, there was no debate, no hesitation. The humans did not ask who sent it. They did not ask what the price would be. All they needed to know was that someone, somewhere had called for help, and that was enough. The Armada turned its gaze toward the stars where the colony burned. Engines ignited, and space lit with the brilliance of steel and fire. The Deathworlder fleet was coming, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. As the survivors on the colony huddled in the ruins, holding one another beneath skies filled with smoke, they thought no one had heard them. But far away, closer with every heartbeat, the answer was already on its way. The first ships of the Deathworlder fleet broke through the silence of the void like wolves moving through tall grass. Their hulls were not polished like the vessels of the great empires. They were dark, scarred, and heavy with weapons. Each one looked less like a ship and more like a predator, built to fight and survive no matter the cost. They did not travel alone. They moved in packs, their signals sharp and precise, their formations unbroken. Even before they reached the colony, the galaxy felt their presence. The invaders who had attacked the colony were known as the Carax. For centuries, they had hidden in the edges of space, building strength and waiting for a chance to strike. They were ruthless, their weapons designed to burn worlds instead of conquering them. When they noticed the first human ship entering the system, they laughed. To them, it was a relic, an old war machine crawling from a forgotten past. Their commanders thought it would be easy to crush. They had no idea what was coming. The human ship did not answer their taunts. It did not broadcast warnings or demands. It simply locked its weapons, and when the Carax fired the first volley, the Deathworlders answered with fury. In an instant, the silence of the void turned into a storm. Railguns tore through enemy hulls, missiles cut across the darkness, and energy blasts ripped apart shields as if they were paper. The first enemy squadron did not even last a minute. Down on the burning colony, survivors hiding in the ruins looked to the sky. For days, the only things they had seen were fire, ash, and the enemy's black ships raining destruction. But now there was something else. A streak of light split the clouds, brighter than the sun, followed by the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. One child pointed upward with wide eyes. "They came," he whispered, his voice shaking. The adults could only stare, unsure if they were dreaming. The battle grew fiercer as more Deathworlder ships arrived. The Armada did not move like an Empire's fleet, with polished strategies and ceremonial orders. They fought like survivors, each ship covering the others, each strike precise, each movement born from lessons learned on a planet that punished weakness. The Carax commanders shouted for reinforcements, but their fleets were unprepared. They had expected an easy slaughter. Instead, they found themselves facing the fury of legends out above the colony. The humans deployed drop pods. They streaked down like falling stars, slamming into the ground with explosions of dust and fire. From each pod, armored soldiers emerged. Their armor was heavy and scarred, their visors glowing in the smoke. They carried weapons that looked brutal, simple, and unyielding. The survivors had heard stories of the Deathworlders, of their strength and their rage. But to see them in person was different. These were not monsters. They were protectors, and they moved with a purpose that gave hope to those who had nearly given up. One squad of humans reached the remains of the colony's central square. They found dozens of survivors hiding in the basements of broken buildings. A human soldier pulled off his helmet, revealing tired but determined eyes. He knelt beside a wounded alien child, lifting her gently in his arms. "You're safe now," he said softly. None of the survivors understood his words, but they understood his tone. They knew what it meant. All across the system, the Deathworlder fleet pressed forward. Ship after ship of the Carax fell. They tried to retreat, but the humans did not allow it. Their guns followed, their missiles hunted, and their fury left no escape. The galaxy had long forgotten what it meant for the Deathworlders to answer a call. Now they were being reminded in fire and blood. By the time the battle ended, the sky above the colony was filled with burning wreckage. The Carax had been broken, their ships scattered or destroyed. The survivors on the ground stood in silence, staring upward as the human fleet held position, like a wall of steel between them and the stars. The man who had sent the SOS sat among the rescued, his wounds wrapped by human medics. He could not believe what he was seeing. Hours ago, he had thought the call would vanish into the void, unheard and forgotten. But now, standing before him, were the very warriors from old legends. He looked at them with awe and whispered, "The galaxy will never forget this day." The Deathworlders did not celebrate their victory. They did not demand tribute or thanks. They simply prepared for what they knew would come next. For if one colony had been attacked, others were at risk. And the Deathworlder fleet, once awakened, would not stop until every threat was gone. Survivors felt a shift in their hearts. For the first time since the invasion began, they believed the enemy could be beaten. They believed the galaxy had hope. And that hope had a name whispered in every corner of space. Now the Deathworlders had returned. The ruins of the colony still smoldered when the Deathworlders set up their command posts. Fires burned in the forests, smoke curled into the sky, and the air was thick with the smell of ash and scorched metal. Yet amidst the destruction, life stirred again. Survivors came out of hiding, guided by the strange armored soldiers who spoke little but carried themselves with calm certainty. Where the empires had failed to protect them, the humans had answered without hesitation. The survivors were brought to a makeshift camp near the landing site. Human medics worked tirelessly, their hands steady, their faces grim. They gave water, treated wounds, and carried the injured without complaint. No one asked for payment. No one asked for loyalty. The Deathworlders had come because someone had called, and that was enough. In the command tent, human officers studied star maps projected in sharp blue light. Their armor was stripped back, their faces tired but unbroken. One pointed to the outer systems of the Valari Empire. "This wasn't a random attack," he said in a voice that carried the weight of experience. "The Karax are probing, testing how quickly the galaxy responds. They didn't expect us to be here. They won't stop with this colony." Another officer nodded. "They'll move again soon. We need to find where they're gathering their fleets before they burn half the sector." The humans did not argue or hesitate. They were used to war, used to acting when others debated. Orders spread through the fleet, and within hours, ships were already leaving orbit to scout the surrounding systems. To the survivors, it seemed impossible how quickly the Deathworlders moved. How naturally they turned from saving one world to preparing for the defense of many. Among the rescued was a young Valari woman named Sira. She had been a teacher before the invasion, a simple life in a small farming town. Now her home was gone, her students scattered or dead. She sat near the campfire, staring at the armored humans who patrolled with silent vigilance. One of them, the soldier who had carried a child from the ruins, noticed her gaze. He sat across from her, removing his helmet again. His hair was dark, his eyes lined with exhaustion. "Why did you come?" Sira asked softly. She knew he couldn't understand her words, but she asked anyway. To her surprise, he tilted his head, as if he caught her meaning. After a pause, he pointed upward, toward the stars, and then placed his hand over his chest. The gesture was simple, but she understood. They had come because that was who they were. That night, the survivors whispered among themselves. The Deathworlders were not what the galaxy had described in fearful tales. Yes, they were strong, fierce, and terrifying in battle, but here, among the broken, they were gentle. They gave food, built shelters, and watched the skies so others could sleep. The survivors began to realize that the stories they had heard were incomplete. The Deathworlders were dangerous, yes, but only to those who brought destruction. To those in need, they were saviors. Above the colony, the Armada stretched like a wall across the heavens. Hundreds of ships drifted in formation, their weapons ready, their engines humming. Messages spread quickly across nearby systems. Traders, miners, and refugees whispered the same words. The humans have returned. Empires that once dismissed them now listened closely. Fleets scrambled to watch, ambassadors argued in fear, and rulers debated whether this awakening was a blessing or a curse. The Karax, however, did not wait. In the dark of space, they gathered more ships, forging a force large enough to crush anything in their path. Their leaders were furious. The Deathworlders' sudden strike had humiliated them, and they would not allow it to stand. They prepared to send a fleet so massive that no one could ignore their power. On the colony, scouts returned with grim news. Another world had fallen, burned like theirs. Thousands more were dead, and the Karax were moving faster than anyone believed. The Valari Empire's navy was broken and scattered. The other empires argued but did not act. Only the humans moved. In the command tent, the Deathworlder officers reviewed the reports. They did not speak of retreat. They did not speak of waiting for reinforcements. Their leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, looked at the map and then at his fleet's status. His words were simple. "We hunt them now." And so the Deathworlder fleet prepared to do what no other would dare. They would not wait for the enemy to come again. They would not stand guard while more colonies burned. They would strike first, hard and fast, carrying war into the heart of the Karax. The survivors of the colony watched as the first ships powered up, their engines burning bright. They could not believe what they were seeing. Humanity, the ghosts of legend, were not just defenders. They were hunters, and the galaxy was about to witness what it meant for predators born of a death world to take the fight into enemy space. Sira stood among her people, her heart pounding as the fleet began to move. She whispered a vow to herself, one she did not yet know how to keep, that she would remember this moment, and she would tell the galaxy what she had seen. Because after this, nothing would ever be the same. The Deathworlder fleet moved like a storm. Their ships were old, scarred, and heavy, but they flew with discipline and speed that no empire could match. Each vessel acted as part of the whole, never breaking formation, never hesitating. To the survivors who watched from the colony, it was like seeing an ocean of steel and fire rising into the sky. They knew this was more than a defense. This was the beginning of a war. In the command ship, human officers stood around a glowing star map. The gray-eyed leader pointed to the system where the Karax were gathering. "This is their staging ground," he said in a calm but unyielding tone. "If we strike here, we cut the head from the beast." There were no long debates, no politics, no waiting for alliances. The Deathworlders acted with the certainty of those who had lived their entire history fighting for survival. The fleet jumped, space twisted, and the stars stretched into rivers of light. When they reappeared, they were on the edge of the Karax stronghold. Before them spread a massive enemy armada, larger than anything the survivors on the colony could imagine. Hundreds of ships floated like a dark cloud, their engines glowing red, their weapons bristling. It was a force meant to terrify, meant to crush resistance before it began. The Karax laughed when the Deathworlders appeared. To them, it was madness for a smaller fleet to face such numbers. Their commanders boasted over open channels, their voices harsh and cruel, mocking the humans for daring to come. But the Deathworlders did not answer. Their silence was more terrifying than any words. The battle began in an instant. The Karax unleashed a wall of firepower, beams and missiles filling the void. But the Deathworlders moved with precision. Their ships cut through the storm, shields holding, weapons firing in brutal rhythm. Every shot counted. Every strike tore holes through enemy lines. They did not waste energy on show or flourish. They fought to kill, and they killed without hesitation. The smaller human ships darted between the giants of the Karax fleet, striking weak points, tearing engines apart. Larger vessels held the line, their cannons booming like thunder across the stars. Explosions lit the void, each one marking another enemy destroyed. The Karax tried to surround them, but the humans fought like predators, breaking traps, turning flanks, and striking where it hurt most. Inside the command ship, orders were short and sharp. Target their carriers. Cut off their reinforcements. Protect the wounded ship. There was no panic, no fear. The Deathworlders fought with the unity of those who trusted one another completely. On the colony, Survivors huddled around com relays, listening as fragments of battle reports came through. Sira sat among them, her hands clenched tight, her eyes fixed on the voices crackling from the speakers. She could not see the battle, but she could hear it, the roar of cannons, the sharp orders, the silence that followed when another enemy ship was destroyed. The Karax fought back with rage. They hurled more ships into the fray, desperate to break the humans. But the harder they pushed, the harder the Deathworlders struck. It was as if the humans had been waiting for this fight, as if they had carried centuries of fury in their bones, and now released it all at once. In the heart of the battle, the gray-eyed commander stood with his hands clasped behind his back, calm even as his ship shook from enemy fire. He watched the star map as enemy markers vanished one by one. His voice was steady when he gave the final order. Break them. The Deathworlder fleet unleashed its full power. Massive cannons fired in unison, tearing through the Karax flagships. Missiles streaked across the void, breaking apart their formations. Fighters swarmed like angry sparks, overwhelming enemy squadrons. The battle that had begun with overwhelming numbers now turned into slaughter. When the last Karax ship tried to flee, the humans pursued without mercy. They did not allow the enemy to regroup, did not allow them to carry news of weakness. One by one, the fleeing ships exploded, until only wreckage drifted in silence. The battlefield was a graveyard of burning metal, lit by the wreckage of a defeated armada. For the survivors listening from afar, the com channels fell quiet. Then, at last, a single human voice spoke, steady and final. The system is secure. The survivors erupted in tears and shouts of relief. They had seen the impossible. A fleet that should have crushed any resistance had been destroyed. And it was done not by empires or alliances, but by the Deathworlders alone. But the humans did not celebrate. They began collecting their wounded, repairing their ships, and preparing for what came next. For they knew the Karax would not stop here. They would regroup, rebuild, and strike again with greater fury. And when they did, the Deathworlders would be waiting. Sira watched the humans in silence, her heart filled with something she could not yet name. Fear, yes, but also awe. They were unlike anyone else she had ever seen. The galaxy had told stories of their cruelty, their savagery, but what she saw was something different. They were protectors, relentless and unbreakable. And now they had declared war. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to summon the Deathworlder Armada. News of the battle spread like wildfire. Across the galaxy, traders, refugees, and wandering ships carried the same story. The Deathworlders had returned, and their fleet had destroyed a Karax armada that no empire dared face. Worlds that had long forgotten their existence whispered their name in awe and fear. In the grand halls of empires, rulers gathered with their advisors, trying to decide if the humans were saviors or a new threat waiting to turn their guns on everyone. In the Valari capital, the council was in chaos. Some argued that the humans should be welcomed as allies, for they had saved a colony the Empire could not protect. Others warned that the Deathworlders were dangerous, unpredictable, and would only bring more destruction. Old memories haunted them tales of wars fought long ago when humans had clashed with other empires, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. Yet no one could deny the truth. The humans had acted when no one else dared, and entire systems now looked to them for hope. In the shadow of the ruined colony, survivors rebuilt with the help of human soldiers. The once broken people now carried determination in their eyes. Sira moved among them, teaching children again under makeshift shelters. She watched as the armored humans carried supplies, repaired machines, and guarded the skies. They did not demand loyalty or tribute. They worked in silence, side by side with those they had saved. Slowly, the survivors began to understand that the humans were not conquerors. They were guardians who fought because someone had called for help, but the Karax were not finished. Deep in the dark reaches of space, their leaders gathered, They were creatures of cruelty, their bodies armored and their eyes burning with hatred. The humiliation of losing an armada festered in them like poison. They would not accept defeat. They summoned every fleet, every weapon, every soldier. They forged new ships, larger and deadlier, and filled them with their fury. "This galaxy will kneel," hissed their warlord, his voice echoing across the chamber. "The humans think themselves strong. We will show them despair." Spies carried whispers of this gathering to the Deathworlders. Reports arrived that the Karax were preparing a counterattack greater than anything yet seen. But the humans did not flinch. In their command ship, the gray-eyed leader studied the map of enemy movements. His officers stood in silence, waiting for his judgment. At last he spoke. "They will come with everything they have. Good. Then we end this." The fleet began its preparations. Weapons were reloaded, armor repaired, engines tested until they roared like beasts. Yet even as they readied for war, the humans did something no one expected. They built safe havens. On the ruined colony, they set up strong defenses and promised the survivors they would not be abandoned again. Other nearby worlds, hearing this, sent envoys begging for protection. The humans accepted without hesitation. The empires watched in disbelief. Where they hesitated, the humans acted. Where they argued over treaties and borders, the humans saved lives. Ordinary citizens across the galaxy began to whisper with hope. "The Deathworlders protect us." They do not wait for councils or kings. These whispers became a tide, and soon rulers feared losing their people's loyalty to the very humans they had once dismissed as myths. Sira felt it more than anyone. Every day, she saw the survivors growing stronger under the Deathworlders' shield. She saw children laugh again, saw farmers rebuild their fields, saw soldiers of other races training beside the humans, learning their brutal but effective methods. It was as if the galaxy itself was shifting. But Sira also felt the weight of fear. She knew the Karax were not idle. At night, she dreamed of black ships blotting out the stars, of fire raining down again. And she knew the next battle would be worse than anything before. The signs came soon enough. Patrol ships vanished on the edges of the sector. Traders reported sightings of massive enemy fleets gathering like storm clouds. Refugees fled in endless streams, carrying stories of worlds already burning. The Karax had awakened fully, and their fury was aimed directly at the humans. The Deathworlder commander stood before his officers as the reports poured in. His face was grim, but his eyes held iron resolve. "They want to break us with fear," he said. "They forget what fear made of us. They forget what world raised us. Let them come. We will not run, we will not kneel, we will fight." And so the Deathworlder Armada prepared for the greatest battle yet. Across the fleet, soldiers sharpened their blades, checked their rifles, and locked their armor into place. Pilots whispered quiet words to their machines. Engineers worked without rest to keep every ship alive. The humans knew what was coming, and they did not hide from it. For the survivors on the colony, there was only silence as they watched the fleet move into position. Children clung to their mothers, elders stared at the sky, and Sira stood among them all, her heart trembling with both fear and pride. The SOS that had once been a desperate plea had now summoned something far greater than hope. It had summoned the fury of a people who did not abandon the weak. The Karax were coming, and the galaxy would soon see a storm unlike any before. The stars trembled as the Karax came. Their fleet stretched across the void like a wall of fire and steel, countless ships burning red with hatred. Their warlord stood at the heart of it, a towering figure on the bridge of a massive dreadnought, his eyes glowing with rage. He had sworn to crush the Deathworlders, to erase their name from the galaxy forever. Now he had brought everything he commanded to the single battle. The survivors on the colony watched in silence as the sky filled with enemy signals. The comm relays carried the same message across every outpost. The Karax had arrived in numbers too great to count. Fear spread quickly, but alongside it came another truth. The humans were ready. The Deathworlder fleet formed into lines, their ships dark and scarred, but steady. The gray-eyed commander stood at the heart of it all, calm as the void itself. Around him, officers prepared their crews, pilots strapped into cockpits, soldiers locked their weapons. There was no panic, no hesitation. They had faced extinction on their homeworld for generations. This was simply another storm, and storms were meant to be endured. When the first enemy shot streaked through space, the humans answered with thunder. The void lit up with fire as railguns roared, missiles cut blazing trails, and cannons pounded in endless rhythm. The Karax surged forward, throwing everything they had, but the Deathworlders met them head-on. Ship after ship collided in brutal combat, explosions painting the stars with light. On the colony below, Syrah listened to the comm feeds, her hands shaking as voices shouted orders and reports. She could hear the strain, the fury, the courage in every word. Children clung to her, asking if the humans would win. She forced herself to smile and said, "They will. They always do." Inside, she prayed. The battle raged for hours. Entire squadrons were wiped out, both human and Karax. But where the enemy fought for conquest, the Deathworlders fought for survival. They adapted to every move, turned every trap, and struck with merciless precision. Their ships fought even when half destroyed, refusing to fall silent. Their soldiers boarded enemy vessels, cutting their way through corridors until nothing was left alive. The Karax warlord watched in fury as his fleets crumbled. He screamed for more ships to press the attack, but the humans pushed harder. At last, the gray-eyed commander gave a single order: break their heart. The Deathworlder fleet shifted like a hammer. They drove straight through the center of the Karax Armada, their largest ships leading the charge. Cannons tore through shields, fighters swarmed, and boarding pods slammed into dreadnought hulls. Explosions ripped across the battlefield as the humans carved a path directly toward the enemy flagship. Inside that flagship, chaos reigned. Human soldiers stormed the decks, armored and relentless, their rifles spitting fire. The Karax fought with desperation, but every step they lost brought the humans closer to their warlord. At last, the doors to his command chamber blew open, and the gray-eyed commander stepped through. The Karax warlord roared and charged, a beast clad in living armor. The two met in a clash that shook the chamber. Steel met claws, fire met fury. The warlord's strength was monstrous, but the human's resolve was unbreakable. Blow after blow, they fought, until at last the commander drove his blade into the warlord's chest. The creature screamed, its voice echoing through the ship, then fell silent forever. With their leader slain, the Karax fleet broke. Some ships tried to flee, but the Deathworlders gave no quarter. The battlefield became a graveyard of burning wrecks, enemy signals vanishing one by one until only silence remained. When the last shot faded, the humans stood victorious. The survivors on the colony wept with relief as the news reached them. The Karax were defeated, their armada destroyed, their warlord dead. The galaxy had been saved not by empires, not by councils, but by the Deathworlders who answered a single SOS. The gray-eyed commander stood on his bridge, staring into the void. His officers waited, but he gave no speech of triumph. His words were simple: "It's done. Now we rebuild." In the weeks that followed, the Deathworlders did not claim territory or demand tribute. Instead, they helped the colonies rise again. They repaired stations, restored trade routes, and trained local defenders. They made it clear they were not conquerors. They were guardians. Syrah walked among the rebuilding efforts, carrying books for children and helping where she could. When she saw the humans, she bowed her head in respect. She knew she had witnessed something the galaxy would never forget. Once, The Deathworlders were only myths. Now they were hope. Word spread to every corner of the stars. The SOS of one desperate colony had summoned an armada, and that armada had changed the fate of the galaxy. Empires could argue, rulers could fear, but the people remembered only one truth when no one else came. The humans did. And so the legend of the Deathworlders grew once more. Not as destroyers, not as monsters, but as protectors who rose when the galaxy needed them most.